In today's episode, we discuss our driving impressions of the Vauxhall VX220, find out about the Scottish lie that surrounds the pneumatic tyre, and test what is perhaps one of the UK's greatest driving roads. Enjoy.
Let's hit the road!
Alright. Okay, quickly, morning all. Semi-successful night last night. Found good shelter, found a campsite, didn't find any food. So, haven't had dinner last night. Didn't have breakfast this morning. Agenda for the next hour is to find something to fill our tums with. Quick fuel up just happened, and then we're on the road up to Durness. Let's go.
Unleaded premium. Do you think it's premium that's going into this car?
Very much doubt it.
No.
Heading into Durness to find some breakfast. Here we go. Craft Village.
You feeling confident?
I'll be very upset if it's not. 12.
12.
Yeah.
We have found somewhere that's willing to give us sustenance, and it's called Cocoa Mountain. I think we might be having a chocolate themed breakfast. Okay, so what's your breakfast, Richard?
It is a croissant with toffee chocolate drizzled over it.
And a side of little chocolates. I can't wait.
It's kind of the only thing available around here. So.
Thank
So
you.
one hot chocolate.
Thank you very much
Here you
indeed.
go.
Food on.
How are you feeling after all of that?
I'm feeling a bit sickly. Not sick, but just a bit like there.
That's the noise you make when you're sick.
After Richard reassured me he wasn't about to throw up in the car, we headed out of Durness. We'd reached the most northern point of our trip, and we were nearing the end of our time on the North Coast 500. After travelling east for 30 miles, we'd be turning due south, leaving the coast and carving our way through the heart of the Highlands. It was at this point that we decided we should say a few words about what it's like to drive the Vauxhall VX220. Before we begin though, I'd like to take a moment to mention that we're not, by any stretch of the imagination, auto journalists. You'll be getting the opinions of just a couple of car enthusiasts who have had the delight of putting this car through its paces over the last 5 days. So, keeping that in mind, I present to you a 10-minute, rather higgledy-piggledy conversation about how the VX220 is to drive. First thing you notice at slow speeds is how heavy the steering is. This is of course non-power assisted steering, and you notice it when you're kind of in a car park or pulling out of a garage or anything like that. It's a workout for the arms.
Yeah, and also the turning circle is pretty horrendous, which means a 3-point turn can be a 5-point turn.
Yes, but as soon as you get up to speed, it's so worth it. I mean, the feel you get through non-power assisted steering is incredible. I've got a Mazda MX-5 Mark 1 and I love that car. It's got power assisted steering, and when I got it, I thought the feel that came through the steering wheel was phenomenal. You really did. You got a good feel of the road. Then I drove this and it ruins my Mazda for me. No, it didn't. I still love my Mazda, but this is next level. What's amazing about this car is it's uncomfortable, it's low, it's hard to get in, there's not tons of space, it's not very much space at all, and yet when I'm driving it, I'm possibly the most comfortable I am of any car I'm driving, especially when I'm driving at speed. The confidence this car gives is unfathomable. You know exactly what the car's going to do, and you know the car is going to do exactly what you tell it to do.
Yeah, you've got tons of grip. The car is super lightweight, along with the incredible mechanical grip. So you can throw it into corners and you just know it's going to hold there. The back end's not going to go, and you can get around corners faster than pretty much anything else out there.
You really can, you really can. Yesterday we were following, BMW, Audi R8, and they were slowpokes really compared to this. Maybe that's because they weren't in as much of a hurry, but you really felt like we were the fastest thing on the roads yesterday without breaking much of a sweat.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be faster in a straight line, and particularly you know, their top end is going to be far greater than ours. But on the North Coast 500, you're not going to get to them high speeds. So it's all about fast acceleration from 30 to 70, 80, and getting around them corners quickly.
It is. Like you said though, that's where this car kind of dips a little under the supercars, is top end speeds. This car is clearly made for speeds between 0 and 110 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Up to there, beautiful, stable, you feel confident in the car. As soon as you start reaching 120 miles an hour, it gets a little bit concerning.
Yeah, you suddenly feel like the steering's gone light, the car's jumping up and down a little bit, and you don't want to be at that speed for a very long period of time.
At this point, Richard and I went on to discuss whether the 6,500 RPM rev limit on the 2.2 litre car was high enough. I'm always for more RPM because to me it adds excitement. Richard on the other hand says he's happy with the limit, as the vast majority of the torque is available so low in the rev range anyway. It's purely personal preference. Let's move on to something we definitely agree on, the brakes.
Yeah, there's a lot of stopping power.
They're good, they're so good. AP Racing calipers on the front, and combine that with the fact that this car weighs 900 to 1,000 kilograms, you know, the turbo weighs 930, the naturally aspirated version weighs under 900, and it just means that the car stops so well.
Yeah, Lotus are famous for doing great brakes, great handling, and this is no exception.
I'll tell you what is exceptional though, the brakes are really good, you step on them and it stops so well, but in traffic as well, they're not grabby, they're really nice and progressive always, and they're quite comfortable to use really. I wouldn't mind driving this car around town in terms of brakes. And in fact, one of the things I want to go back to is the steering, just for a moment, because I want to talk about what happens when you throw it into a corner. I don't know if the seats are bolstered enough, in my opinion. They've got a decent amount at the top, but on the bum, you've not got much holding you in. But what really gets me is, for the driver, if you throw the car into a left-hand corner, you're absolutely fine, because you can use your right leg against the whole side of the chassis to hold your body in place.
Yeah.
Throwing it into a right-hand corner though, I find personally, but because there's no divider between the passenger and driver's side footwells, for me, I'm looking for something to put my left leg against when I'm driving to stop my body from sliding out from the centre of the steering wheel. What I find is I'm ending up sliding and my thigh is against the gear lever, which is a massive issue because of course if you're cornering and wanting to change gear, you're in a sticky situation and you kind of have to prop yourself off the gear lever. That shouldn't be done on any car.
No, I don't actually have that issue, but maybe that's because you're short and
Thank you.
I have longer legs than you.
Of course, what's going to allow you to throw the car into those corners is the suspension. This car is on gas gold coilovers, but the regular VX220 did have slightly softer suspension than the Elise S2. The VX220 Turbo slightly stiffened its suspension, probably just to hold the extra weight. But regardless of whether you've got aftermarket coilovers, regular naturally aspirated suspension, or slightly stiffer turbo car suspension, you're going to feel the bumps.
Yeah, the car is super planted around the corners, but the compromise is if you're going over any bumps, you feel them. You've got to dodge the potholes because otherwise you kind of crash over them.
Yeah, we've had a few near misses in terms of potholes and cattle grids. You feel them like nothing else in this car. They're teeth chatterers, they really are. But it all kind of plays into the mindset that this car is uncompromising. But it's really funny because this car wasn't made to be uncompromising. Even though Vauxhall told everyone it was, they said in their brief publicly that the car was uncompromising, but then they had actually all these compromises they had to put in to make it different to the Elise, such as it had to be slightly more usable, and in that slightly more comfortable, and with that slightly softer suspension. But I think if this car is a compromised car, it's only by early 2000 standards. Nowadays, people say the Alpina A110 is an uncompromising car because it's so light. It's considerably heavier than this car.
Yeah, it's over 1,000 kg, right?
Exactly.
Considerably over.
Yeah, and that's not because they want to make a car of that weight. It's because safety regulations mean more compromises.
Yeah, airbags and all that, they all add weight.
This is the car to have on the North Coast 500s.
Yeah, I'd say this or an Elise. You know, people make different arguments for both, but is the ultimate car.
Here's one of those. Forever horrible. Exactly. Of course, with the suspension, the car is super low, and not only does that make it harder to get in and out of, but it also means we have had some scrapes when we've hit bumps in the road and things like that. We've had some scrapes to the under tray on this car, and we've kind of snapped half of our front number plate off. We're hoping we won't get in any trouble for that.
Yeah, it always makes you paranoid when you're scraping your car, and don't get me wrong, I'm trying to avoid it as much as possible, but this car has all under trays on it. They're designed to protect the car, so a little bit of light scuffing as you're going over a pothole, or where the kind of road cambers to both sides, you've got a bit of a hump in the middle, it's not the end of the world. Cars do survive it. They're designed to be fairly durable.
Yes, exactly. So, to conclude, it's a damn good car. I think actually we've been proof that you can use it to tour.
Yeah, if you can use this car to tour the North Coast 500 and camp, and we've got all the camera equipment, and we've still fitted it all in. If you've got a nice car in your garage and you're a bit precious about it and it just comes out on the Sunday afternoons, tell you what, just bring it out, have fun with it, because you'll probably enjoy it way more and feel way less nervous about driving it about once you've been around the North Coast 500, and you'll find it's a lot more practical and usable than possibly you think.
Yeah, exactly.
By the time we'd finished chatting about how the car drives, we had driven all the way to Leg, about 50 miles south from where we started our day. However, as we parked up, I realised we hadn't yet talked about one of the car's most important components.
So we've just stopped for some lunch, and we realised when we did our mini review on the car, there's a component we didn't mention, something that maybe contributes to the handling characteristics of the car more than any other component. A component as well that was invented by a Scotsman. The tyres. The story of the Scotsman who invented the pneumatic tyre is pretty well known, but here's the thing, it's a lie. Give me 5 minutes to tell you the real story.
But first, a quick apology, because I managed to misspell pneumatic time and time again when making this whiteboard video. I hope it doesn't get in the way of what otherwise is a pretty interesting story. So anyway, type into Google, who invented the pneumatic tyre, and you will be greeted with a lie. The name at the top of the page will say John Boyd Dunlop, and the story of how he invented the tyre goes like this. John Dunlop was born in Scotland, but he moved to Ireland when he was 27 years old, where he worked as a veterinary surgeon. He also met his wife there, and they had a daughter and a son together. As a vet, his job required him to travel around from place to place to see animals that were too sick to stand, and his preferred method of transport was a bicycle. He noted how uncomfortable the rough roads were on his bike's hard wheels, but he figured it was just a part of life. However, when he saw his beloved son struggling to ride his tricycle over Belfast's bumpy cobbled streets, he decided to take action. Until this time, wheels were fitted with solid strips of rubber, but Dunlop figured that if he could fit a cushion of air between the wheel and that rubber, the shock absorption would be hugely improved. And he managed it, and it did improve shock absorption and ride comfort greatly. Not only was his son able to whiz around on 3 wheels, but after Dunlop had his patent granted in 1888, he entered his pneumatic tyres into bicycle races, and the rider, with the use of the Dunlop tyres, won race after race after race, in Ireland and in England. His tyres gained notoriety as the greatest invention since the wheel, and when word of Dunlop's triumph hit France,
his patent was immediately revoked, because unbeknown to him, it had all already been done 41 years earlier, by another Scotsman no less. The year is 1845, and a 23-year-old Scottish engineer called Robert William Thomson was working on something special. He'd always had an eye for improvement. At the age of 17, he had redesigned his mother's washing mangle so that wet linen would no longer get stuck in it. And when working as a civil engineer, he devised a way that explosive charges could be detonated using electricity, saving the lives of countless miners across the globe. But now he was working on something else, something that had never been seen before, something that could change the nature of transportation forever. The pneumatic tyre. He inflated tubes of rubberized fabric around the wheel and then encased them in strips of leather for protection. The results were good. The aerial wheels, as Thomson named them, improved the comfort of horse-drawn carriages, and he successfully patented his invention in the USA and in France. But unfortunately, it all failed to catch on. The materials and process were too expensive for many to justify, and since bicycles were still in their relative infancy, the need for a softening solution hadn't really sprung to mind yet. So his invention sort of faded into nothingness and was all too quickly forgotten about. Therefore, it was Dunlop who got the fame and glory and made all the money for inventing the tyre. Well, not really. Although he did go on to start a shop producing air-filled bicycle tyres, he didn't really make much money from his invention, even though you see his name plastered on everything from Wellington boots to tennis balls. But the real money in air-filled rubber was still to be made, and the spoils were to go to whoever managed to fit pneumatic tyres to the next big thing. The motor car. However, once again, the Dunlop company weren't the first to innovate. Know the folks who get the credit for that?
It's this guy here, Mr. Michelin. But I'll save that story for a French road trip.
Once I'd finished harassing fellow diners and we'd eaten our lunch, we continued our journey south. Leaving the North Coast 500 at only the halfway point may seem like a bit of an odd decision to some, especially as we were switching coastal beauty for congestions and dual carriageways. But there's method behind our madness, or experience at least. Having driven the full North Coast 500 before, I am adamant that the West Coast side of the route is far superior to the East Coast side, which itself is far busier and less fun to experience. And we realised that by cutting out the inferior half of the NC 500, we were able to make time to check out a less famous driving road we'd been told about. One that is supposedly not just a great road to drive, but is a genuinely great driving road. It's called the Old Military Road, and this is what it's like to drive. Thanks for watching episode 6. Tune in tomorrow where we put a fairly unlikely Vauxhall claim to the test before going in search for the future of the Scottish automotive industry. In the meantime, please do consider subscribing to my channel should you want to be kept up to date with my newest videos. Thanks.